One of the most overlooked movement patterns in weight training is the hip hinge. I want to show you guys a beginner aspect of how to start getting hip hinging correctly, and then exercises that can incorporate that hip hinge and get you stronger, better, decrease that back pain, decrease chance of injuries, and help you to move more efficiently throughout the day. Follow along. The first most basic movement is the waiter's bow. Now what you're going to do with this position is you're going to stand, put your one hand on your stomach, one hand, the back of your hand on your lower back. From this position, you're pushing your hips backwards with a soft bend in the knees, pretty much locked out. Push your hips back, and as soon as you feel that pinky start losing contact with your lower back, that means you're rounding your back. You want to have a flat back the whole time, so your hand is pressed against that back, and then stand back up. You picture closing the car door when you're holding groceries. You push your... Oh man, I just dropped you guys. I dropped you. My high-tech tripod equipment, not so high-tech, just totally dropped to the ground. I hope you're okay. I'll hip hinge to pick you up. Yeah. So back to that waiter's bow. Hand here, hand on your lower back. Push your hips back, and that way this pinky is flat on your back. As soon as you start to round, this pinky starts to float off of your back. Common problem people have is they go down and up. And notice where my knees go when I go down and up, right past my toes. You want to make sure your knees are over your ankles. Hips back, hips forward. From there, you can do a good morning, a body weight good morning. So hands up to your ears, keep your feet shoulder width apart, hips back, head up and eyes up, hips forward. Hips back, head up and eyes up, hips forward. You keep hearing me say head up and eyes up because if I look down, what happens to my back? It gets round. Picture if you have bags of groceries in your hand and you need to close your car door. You push your hips back to close the car door. That's the movement that we want to focus on with this hip hinge. Bags of groceries, hips back, car door closed. Boom. To incorporate some weight training with this hip hinge movement, I highly recommend going to dumbbells or a kettlebell or even a trap bar and doing a deadlift or an RDL. We're doing that same exact movement with the kettlebells or dumbbell. I would recommend doing these first before doing a barbell. And pushing those hips back, keeping your head up and eyes up, hips forward. Hips back, head up and eyes up, hips forward. That's the movement of that hip hinge. You push your hips back, you feel that stretch in the hamstrings, and you bring your hips forward. Hips back, hips forward. Remember, it's not down and up. And lastly, one of the best exercises you guys can do with a kettlebell to improve your strength, your cardio, mobility, and everything is the kettlebell swing. Kettlebell swing is the king or queen of the hip hinge. So the hip hinge movement drives the kettlebell up. Now you know it's not a hip hinge movement and it becomes a shoulder exercise when I squat down and I lift up. You can see that I'm lifting it clearly with my shoulders to control the weight. For it to become a hip hinge exercise, you want to keep the weight above your knees because as soon as I go below my knees, head comes down, back gets round. Kettlebell above the knees, hips back, hips forward. Hips back, hips forward. You'll see the kettlebell float at the top. Clearly, I am not using my shoulders to lift it up. I'm driving the kettlebell up by moving my hips forward. Comes back, hips forward. Side note, did you know that kettlebell swings are a great alternative to box jumps? If you want to incorporate jumping into your training, but you have bad knees. If you look at my jump, down, jump, high impact, brutal on your knees. Kettlebell swing, down, up, the same movement minus the impact. You guys, I can't emphasize enough how important it is to learn how to hip hinge correctly. I'm training firefighters. They're constantly picking stuff up from the ground. They need to learn how to use that hip hinge to lift. If you have kids, oftentimes you get hurt picking up their toys or picking them up, rotating to the side, not hinging, and lifting with all back. As soon as you learn how to consistently hip hinge correctly, I guarantee you, your weight training program, your day-to-day activities will improve drastically. Focus heavily on this hip hinge movement, get it down to a habit, a good habit, and to a science. If you have questions about health and fitness, hit me up and follow for more value. Rock it out.